Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip back into the Victorian age, but not the fancy, candlelit ballroom version you've probably seen in costume dramas. No, tonight is about the smells, the stains, the unwashed corners of life that people politely avoid in history books. You are stepping into a world where soap is optional, water is suspicious, and perfume is a desperate attempt at damage control. Imagine living in a place where someone could pass out from the odor of your hair before they even got close, enough to compliment your corset. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a little comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'm always thrilled to scroll through and see people drifting off to sleep in California, London, or some small town I've never heard of. It makes all these long hours researching stinky Victorians totally worth it. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the middle of a cramped Victorian street. Cobblestones slick with horse droppings, smoke curling from chimneys. And everywhere you turn, there's another reminder that hygiene wasn't exactly their top priority. Women stroll past you in gowns that look glamorous from afar. But if you get closer, don't breathe in too deep. The fabric smells like a mix of coal smoke and last week's stew. Think of it as the original vintage scent, except instead of costing a fortune in a perfume shop, it just comes free with living in 1850. The funny thing is, Victorians were obsessed with appearances. Cleanliness was linked with morality, but the actual cleaning part was tricky. Water wasn't always safe. People genuinely feared it could make them sick, and in a way, they weren't wrong. Bathing in dirty water could spread typhoid or cholera faster than you could say pass the soap. Imagine trying to wash your face and ending up with a deadly infection. Makes that overpriced face wash in your bathroom suddenly feel like a blessing, doesn't it? Women of the time often relied on quick fixes. They powdered their skin, sprinkled lavender water, and prayed no one noticed the layer of grime underneath. Picture someone today spraying half a can of body spray after a workout and calling it self-care. Yeah, it was kind of like that, except with more lace and fewer gym memberships. One of the strangest habits was how rarely they changed clothes. A dress could be reworn day after day, season after season, without a proper wash. At best, it might get brushed off, the hems beaten against a wall to shake out the dust. Actual laundering was risky. It could damage expensive fabric, and water plus soap wasn't always available. Some women even stitched little absorbent pads into their undergarments to soak up sweat and odor. Think of it as an early version of a deodorant pad, except sewn into your corset. Fashion meets function, in the worst possible way. Now here's a detail you don't often hear. Many women believed that keeping the pores of the skin tightly closed was healthier, because open pores could let in disease. So rather than scrubbing their skin clean, they'd avoid hot baths or vigorous washing. The idea of clogged pores being protective sounds absurd now, but back then it was accepted wisdom. Historians still argue whether this was just bad science or a clever excuse to avoid getting wet. Either way, the result was the same. You smelled your neighbor before you saw her. Let's not forget the hair. Victorian women prided themselves on long, luxurious locks, but washing it, a nightmare. Without shampoo, hair was often rinsed maybe once a month, if that. Natural oils, coal soot, and lice created a combination you definitely don't want to picture at bedtime. To manage, women rubbed their scalps with powders, often made of rice flour or even ground starch. Imagine putting pancake mix on your head and calling it beauty care. Delicious. Maybe. Effective. Debatable. And then there were the teeth. Dental hygiene was barely in its infancy. Toothbrushes existed but were expensive, often made with animal bristles that fell out quickly. Toothpaste recipes included chalk, crushed shells, or even brick dust. Yes, brick dust. You'd literally scrub your mouth with ground-up building material. The smile might look brighter for a day, but the gums... Let's just say modern dentists would faint on the spot. Through all of this, disease found easy ways to spread. Typhus, tuberculosis, scarlet fever illnesses that thrived on crowded homes and filthy habits. Women working in laundries, kitchens, and factories faced daily exposure. Even the ladies of leisure weren't safe. The fabrics of their gowns could carry germs, especially when reworn endlessly. You can imagine walking into a drawing room filled with perfume and powder. But beneath it all, germs were just having a party. Of course, we can laugh at it now, sitting here with hot showers, deodorant, and toothpaste that doesn't double as construction material. But the truth is, these women were doing their best with the knowledge they had. In some ways, they were even creative. Reusing water, sewing sweat pads, dusting Herit wasn't glamorous, but it was resourceful. And maybe, when you think about it, you realize how far we've come. The little annoyances of modern hygiene, the broken hairdryer, the overpriced shampoo suddenly don't feel so bad. Take a breath here. Imagine the contrast, your soft bed, clean sheets, maybe even the faint smell of laundry detergent lingering in the air. Compare that with damp wool skirts, lice itching under hairpins, and the constant fear of sickness. No wonder Victorians were obsessed with covering it all up with cologne. You'd do the same, and remember, the point isn't to sneer at them. It's to see how people survived, adapted, even laughed through all the filth. That's why I love when you guys leave comments. Hearing that someone in Paris fell asleep halfway through a story, or that someone in Texas giggled at a joke about brick dust toothpaste, makes me smile. It makes all this effort how it's spent imagining stinky corsets and greasy hair. So thank you, really. You're the reason this strange little journey into the past keeps going. Now the night settles around you, the faint hum of your fan blending with my words. You picture yourself walking slowly down that sooty street, skirts brushing against the stones, the smells closing in. But your eyelids are heavy, your breathing slower. You don't need to survive Victorian hygiene, you just need to float above it, safe and clean in your bed. And as the story unfolds further, you'll wander deeper into their world, curious and amused, never quite sure what unpleasant surprise waits around the corner. You're still there, drifting along those narrow streets, and now the subject of bathing creeps in. You might think, well, surely they just needed a good bath to fix all that, but oh, sweet summer child, it's never that simple. The very act of bathing in Victorian times was like rolling the dice with your health. Imagine standing in a cramped washroom, staring at a tub filled with water that looks more like weak soup than something you'd want to put your body in. The water was often reused by multiple people in a household, starting with the father, then the mother, and by the time it reached the youngest child, it was more mud puddle than bath. You wouldn't just hesitate, run for the hills. It wasn't just laziness. There was a genuine fear that bathing could do more harm than good. Doctors warned that soaking in hot water might weaken the body or open up those dreaded pores we whispered about earlier. Open pores were like little doorways for disease, they thought. So many women avoided a full bath entirely, preferring instead a sponge wash where they dabbed at their faces and hands, leaving the rest to imagination. You know those days when you're too tired to shower and just splash your face at the sink? Congratulations, you've basically gone full Victorian. Here's the kicker. The water itself wasn't clean. In London, much of the water supply came straight from the Thames, which also doubled as the city's dumping ground. Picture thousands of households and factories, all pouring waste into the same river that delivered drinking water, a bath drawn. From that source wasn't so much cleansing as it was marinating yourself in bacteria. It's almost comical. You spend money heating water, you haul it upstairs, you sink into it, and instead of emerging refreshed, you step out with a higher chance of cholera. Luxury, Victorian style. Bathhouses existed, of course, but not the glamorous kind. They were crowded, dim, and often filled with steam carrying the scent of mildew and sweat. People from the working classes might save up for the occasional visit, but the experience wasn't relaxing. Instead of scented candles and soothing music, you got the sound of hacking coughs and dripping pipes. If you're picturing a spa day, erase that. Replace it with the smell of damp wood and the awkward awareness that someone else just used that same tub 15 minutes earlier. One lesser-known detail. Some families bathed only once a year, often around May. The phrase, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," comes from the idea that everyone used the same tub in order of age. And by the time the baby was washed, the water was so murky that you might literally lose track of a child in it. Whether that exact origin is true or just a colorful myth, it captures the point. Bathing was rare, unpleasant, and potentially hazardous. Historians still debate just how widespread this yearly bath custom really was. But it's the kind of image that sticks in your mind like an unwanted smell. Now, if you were wealthy, you could afford some comfort. Fancy houses had copper bathtubs, maybe even piped water, though the pipes were often made of lead. Yes, lead. So while you luxuriated in your warm soak, you were quietly dosing yourself with poison. It's almost poetic, striving for refinement, but slowly damaging your nervous system one bath at a time. It makes that rusty showerhead in your apartment feel positively safe. Women, in particular, had their own tricks. Instead of full baths, they sometimes used vinegar washes or herbal rinses. Rosewater, lavender, chamomile, anything to mask the smell and avoid too much scrubbing. You can almost see a lady patting herself down with a scented cloth, praying it's enough to get her through the day. Compare that with your own arsenal of soaps, shampoos, and scrubs lining your bathroom shelf. It feels decadent just knowing you can have a clean towel whenever you want. And the irony is that many Victorians believed dirt itself was protective. Some doctors insisted a layer of grime on the skin kept illness out. Think about that the next time you're too lazy to wash your face at night. You're not procrastinating. You're just reenacting advanced 19th century medical theory. Give yourself a gold star. But for all their questionable hygiene, there were also small victories. Public health reformers began to push for cleaner water, better sewage systems, and more frequent bathing. Soap production increased, making it cheaper and more accessible. By the late Victorian period, bathing was becoming more common, though still far from today's standards. You start to glimpse the beginnings of the modern obsession with cleanliness, sprouting right there in the muck. As you drift along this thought, Picture yourself leaning over a Victorian washtub. The air is heavy with steam, your hands raw from scrubbing, your dress sticking to your back. The water darkens with every stroke, but you keep going, because what else can you do? Outside, the street smells of horse dung and smoke. Inside, at least, you can pretend for a moment that you are fresh, clean, safe. It's not perfect, but it's survival, and here's where the humor lands. Imagine explaining to a Victorian woman that today, people buy expensive bottled water to bathe their pets, or that you can step into a shower, press a button, and be blasted with hot water instantly, no coal, no hauling buckets. She'd either faint or laugh in your face. Meanwhile, you're complaining that the shower pressure isn't strong enough. Perspective is a funny thing. The sound of dripping water fades in your mind now. The tub dissolves, and you're left with the quiet awareness of your own clean sheets. The faint hum of your fan, the comfort of modern hygiene. Your eyelids feel heavier, your breath a little slower, as you recognize how far away you are from that sooty bathhouse. Yet curiosity lingers. If bathing was this much trouble, what about the rest of their daily routines? You can almost hear the rattle of pins in unwashed hair, waiting just around the corner of memory. The street blurs a little in your half-sleeping mind, and now your gaze drifts upward, to the crowns of Victorian women walking past you. Long, elaborate hairstyles tower like sculpted monuments, pinned and braided and looped with ribbons. From a distance, it looks elegant. Up close, it smells faintly of coal smoke, old oil, and something alive that really shouldn't be there. You're standing among a sea of carefully arranged hairdos, but beneath the curls lurks a private battlefield. Victorian hair was the pride of womanhood. The longer, the better, even if it dragged behind them like a dust mop. But washing it, that was a rare ordeal. Shampoo didn't exist as we know it, and regular soap was harsh enough to strip fabric, let alone a scalp. So hair went weeks without a proper rinse, relying instead on powders or oils to disguise the grime. Imagine sprinkling starch into your roots like you're prepping pastry dough, then heading out to a dance. From a few feet away, it might pass. Up close, you'd wish for a clothesline between you and the other person. The insects didn't mind. Lice and nits thrived in thick hair, and delosing was practically a household chore. Mothers combed through their children's scalps, searching for tiny moving shadows. Sometimes kerosene or vinegar was rubbed in, both stinging and stinking, but better than endless scratching. And yes, people joked about it back then too. You could spot a child furiously scratching and sigh. Well, at least it means they're alive. Gallows humor, Victorian style. What makes it even stranger is the belief that cutting hair too short was unhealthy. Long hair was seen as a sign of vitality, a curtain of protection against illness. So women endured the weight, the tangles, and the occasional infestation because it was thought to be safer, purer. You'd think of it as an organic air filter, except one that traps more dust than it ever clears. There's a story often told in whispers that some women only wash their hair a few times a year, coating it in pomade or bear grease in between. Picture a glossy braid that glistens not with shampoo, but with animal fat. The shine is real, but so is the smell. Whether every household followed that exact routine is Don't all agree, but enough. Accounts linger to make you wrinkle your nose across the centuries. The fashionable classes turned this into performance. Hairdressers twisted locks into towering arrangements, sometimes padded with wire or stuffed with wool for volume. Think of a Victorian updoor as the ancestor of modern hairsprays instead of a spritz. You've got literal upholstery hidden in there. These creations could last for days, even weeks, with only minimal Convenient, yes, but also a perfect hiding place for dirt and, occasionally, uninvited critters. Imagine nodding politely at a neighbor's grand hairstyle while silently wondering if it just moved. Working women had fewer luxuries. Their hair was braided tight, pinned back, or covered with a scarf to keep it out of machines and kitchen fires. Yet, even under the fabric, sweat and soot collected. By evening, the scarf reeked of the day's labor. Unpinning the braid was like opening a chimney. Fluid released everything trapped inside, and still, this was normal. Complaining about smell or itching wasn't fashionable. You just endured. One odd remedy. Some women brushed their hair hundreds of strokes a night, believing it distributed natural oils evenly and cleansed impurities. The image of someone endlessly dragging a boar bristle brush through heavy hair while candlelight flickers nearby is oddly soothing. Except when you realize the brush itself was rarely cleaned. All that oil, dust, and lice eggs just moved back and forth, night after night. A ritual of elegance, wrapped around a secret of filth. And you can't help but laugh when you compare it to now. Today, people debate dry shampoo brands on social media, worrying about residue. Back then, dry shampoo meant flour, starch, or whatever white powder was handy in the pantry. Your grandma's baking cupboard, basically. Sprinkle, pat, smile, done. If someone tells you your hair smells faintly like bread, you take it as a compliment. The strange thing is, despite all this, hair was still romanticized. Men wrote poems about golden locks, artists painted shining braids, and advertisements promised miracle tonics for stronger growth. Hair was currency, identity, and charm. Some even cut it off to sell for wig. Real hair extensions have a long, greasy history. You picture yourself now, running a cautious hand through one of those elaborate Victorian styles, feeling the weight, the stickiness, the soft tickle of powder. It's not disgusting, exactly, it's human. It's survival in a world where water made you sick and soap was harsh. You begin to understand why hair became both pride and burden, a symbol and a secret, and just as your eyelids droop a little heavier, you imagine the sound of a comb dragging slowly through tangled strands, the quiet patience of the gesture, the soft scratch against the scalp. It's repetitive, calming, like a lullaby disguised as grooming. Filth and beauty wrapped into one, pulling you deeper into the rhythm of another age. You draw in a slow breath, the damp air catching at your throat, and suddenly you are in a parlor where fabric dictates not just beauty, but survival. There she is, a young woman clutching at the bedpost, while her sister tugs hard at the laces behind her. Each pull tightens the corset until her chest rises in shallow gasps. The look on her face is half pride, half faint terror, because nothing says elegance like struggling for air. You can almost hear her ribs protesting, yet everyone in the room nods approvingly, as though this little act of suffocation is a triumph of refinement. But the corset does more than shape a waist. It traps heat, sweat, and dust in a snug embrace, creating the kind of environment any germ would happily call home. Think of wearing the same gym shirt for a week straight. No, actually, don't try it. The Victorians did that experiment for you. Washing was irregular at best, and when it did happen, Water came from barrels already tinged with grime, and soap might burn skin more than it cleaned fabric. So layers of linen and whalebone often carried a private colony of bacteria that no one could see but everyone could smell. In the corner of the room, an older woman ties her daughter's corset with brisk efficiency, muttering, "Beauty always costs." You're tempted to whisper back, "Yes, but maybe not your lungs." Yet in this world, nobody dares question it. Corsets were often passed down, rarely scrubbed, and the tighter they were, the more sophisticated the wearer seemed. Some scholars even suggest that the endless recycling of these garments may have helped tuberculosis spread, dust and fibers carrying disease from one body to the next. A fashion statement turned microbial courier, who would have guessed? The scent in the air is unmistakable. Part mildew, part rose oil, part something you'd rather not identify. They tried to mask it with perfumes, but the result was less floral meadow and more floral meadow on fire. The oddest part. People got used to it. What today would send someone sprinting for the exit was then a sign of normal, even respectable, life. A maid gathers up a discarded corset, clearly intended for the next person. The whalebone creaks as she folds it, unaware she might be passing along more than a garment. You can't help imagining the modern review. 1 star. Smells weird, possibly contagious. Sadly, no rating system existed back then, only silent endurance. As you watch the laces tighten and relax, it hits you that the corset wasn't merely clothing. It was a sealed chamber, a theater where germs performed unseen dramas, all while society applauded the spectacle of slim waists. The irony is almost funny. If bacteria could vote, they would have crowned the corset the true queen of Victorian fashion. And you step back, relieved to breathe freely again, while the picture of stiff fabric, faint smiles, and hidden microbes lingers, wrapping itself around you like an invisible ribbon. You wander deeper into the city, your boots sticking a little to the damp stones, and the air takes on that unmistakable sharpness, the kind that makes your nose wrinkle before your mind even catches up. You've just found one of London's public conveniences. What a charming phrase, public convenience, to neat little words, trying desperately to hide the chaos behind them. At first glance, it looks harmless enough. A squat brick hut hunched at the edge of the street, its roof sagging like it's embarrassed to still be standing. A crooked sign leans above the doorway, weathered by soot and rain, letters barely legible. You hesitate on the threshold because the smell arrives before you step inside. It seeps out like a warning, sour and dense. The ghost of every visitor who's ever shuffled in and shuffled out. The inside feels more crowded than it should, and not just because of the bodies. Narrow wooden benches line the walls, each one cut with dark holes. Privacy is a luxury no one here can afford. Men, women, even children perch shoulder to shoulder, skirts brushing trousers, eyes studiously averted. You realize quickly that people pretend not to notice each other, as though ignoring your neighbor's very obvious purpose is a form of politeness. A Victorian code of honor, if you will. Don't ask, don't look. Just survive the smell. You catch a boy wrinkling his nose, stifling a laugh until his mother shoots him a glare sharp enough to quiet him. You almost want to laugh yourself. Feels absurd, like a prank gone too far. Imagine explaining to someone today that going to the restroom could mean sitting elbow to elbow with half your neighborhood. That's not a spa day. That's a psychological test. The floor beneath you is damp, slick in patches, and you find yourself stepping carefully, as if the stones themselves might catch some dreadful contagion and pass it to your boots. The trickle of liquid escaping under the door tells its own story. Waste didn't always stay neatly in place. Rain, runoff, and simple neglect let it wander out into the street, where horses and humans alike carried it further. You can see how quickly illness could travel here, spreading like gossip, passed along with every careless step. People didn't talk much about what these places did to their health. Respectable conversation avoided such topics altogether. It was one of those things everyone knew and no one admitted. Yet sickness hovered invisibly in the damp air. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, names that sound like curses whispered in the dark. And if you think this is bad, remember that many households had their own cesspits under the floorboards, quietly fermenting until they overflowed. At least here, the disaster was communal. You lean against the doorway and watch a woman in a faded blue dress tug her gloves tighter, before daring to touch the bench. Another smooth gesture, as if her dignity might shield her from germs. It won't, of course, but rituals matter. And you realize these toilets weren't just practical, were stages where shame and necessity played out together, a lesser-known wrinkle in the story is that some church parishes actually controlled these public lavatories, charging a penny for entry. They were sometimes called spending a penny, a phrase that still lingers today in certain corners of Britain. Imagine the awkward pause when you had no penny and nowhere else to go. One historian even suggested that this penny fee excluded the very poor, driving them back to alleys and chamber pots. Whether that's entirely accurate, well, historians still debate how widespread the practice was, but the phrase stuck, like the smell. Speaking of chamber pots, remember that not everyone even bothered with these public huts. Plenty of Londoners simply hurled the contents of their pots out the window. A cheerful gardy-loo, borrowed from French, meaning watch out for the water, was sometimes shouted before the splash. If you were lucky, you stepped aside in time. If not, well, your evening walk got more eventful. Compared to that, maybe these public facilities were an improvement, though the bar for improvement was laughably low. One thing you can't escape is how disease crept into everyday routines without announcement. In 1854, a cholera outbreak swept through Soho, killing hundreds within days. It was later traced to a contaminated water pump on Broad Street, a turning point in medical history. But while John Snow, the physician who investigated it, famously removed the pump handle, his discovery didn't stop people from continuing to use overcrowded, filthy privies. Habits change slowly, especially when shame keeps people silent. Standing there, you start to notice the silence between visitors. Nobody lingers, nobody speaks. The act is stripped of ceremony, done quickly, as if speed alone could outwit infection. And yet each hurried visit spreads its mark across the city. A bit on a hem here, a droplet on a boot there. All of it carried out into homes where soap was scarce and water often suspect. The danger wasn't contained. It followed you like an invisible companion. Of course, looking back, it's tempting to scoff at the Victorians, to imagine you would have handled it better. But think about modern bathrooms at a crowded stadium or train station. The queues, the smell, the broken locks. Doesn't it feel oddly familiar? Now subtract the plumbing, the disinfectant, the illusion of control. Congratulations, you're standing right where they did. Only with Wi-Fi in your pocket. There's a dark humor in how these toilets embodied both progress and failure. They were meant to make life better, and in some ways they did. Waste had a designated spot, at least, rather than the street. But they also became breeding grounds for the very diseases reformers hoped to prevent. It's a little like buying a treadmill and then using it exclusively as a clothes rack. You solved one problem and created another, and still people endured. They folded discomfort into daily life, the way you fold laundry with a sigh, resigned but practical. Because survival in the Victorian city wasn't about comfort. It was about getting by, even if that meant holding your breath, fixing your gaze on the wall, and pretending the stranger beside you wasn't sharing the same unfortunate performance, so you stepped back into the street. Grateful for the rush of fresher air, though even the air smells of coal smoke and horse droppings. Somehow, it's still an improvement. You shake your head, a little queasy, a little amused, and you realize the city itself carries its secrets not just in its grand buildings and gaslit avenues, but in the forgotten corners where necessity met taboo, where humanity humbled itself daily. And tonight, those whispers cling to you like the faintest echo, daring you to keep walking deeper into their world. You wander onward, thinking perhaps the air will finally clear, that the sour tang of the public privy will drift from your memory. Instead, another scent greets you, tory, floral, cloying, like a garden trapped in a perfume bottle and shaken too many times. It comes from a group of women gathered near a shop window, their faces pale as moonlight, lips tinged with the faintest shadow of red. For a moment you think, ah, elegance at last. But look closer, and you see the cracks in the mask. Victorian beauty was a dangerous performance, one that demanded skin so pale it practically glowed in candlelight. To achieve it, women dusted their faces with powders laced with lead, or smoothed creams infused with mercury. Yes, the same mercury that today we wouldn't touch without gloves. Back then, it was sold in pretty jars, promising radiance and refinement. They didn't just wear their makeup, they absorbed it day after day, until the very pursuit of beauty gnawed at their health. One woman tilts her chin, inspecting her reflection in the shop glass. You notice how the powder doesn't hide the tiny sores along her jawline. In fact, it makes them more obvious, as if the face itself is rebelling against the poison smeared upon it. She dabs again, undeterred. Beauty is worth the risk, or so the advertisements whisper. And here's the cruel joke. The sicker you looked, the more society praised your delicacy. Pale skin signaled refinement, fragility, even moral superiority. Nothing says I'm refined quite like chronic anemia. If you think about it, not much has changed. Today we slather on creams with names we can't pronounce, trusting they'll do what the glossy packaging promises. The Victorians simply skipped the fine print because there wasn't any. No regulations, no warning labels, just blind faith in the idea that suffering could be chic. You overhear two women gossiping in low voices. They murmur about a neighbor whose once bright eyes now seem dimmer, her cheeks hollow, her mood unsteady. Nerves, they say, though the truth may lie in the arsenic-laced powders she favors. Yes, arsenic too sold, as a way to brighten skin from within, sometimes taken in pills that whittled away more than wrinkles. People knew these concoctions weren't entirely safe, yet fashion spoke louder than fear. Historians still puzzle over how much the average woman understood about these risks. Some claim people were fully aware but accepted the danger. Others argue the poisons were so normalized that no one questioned them. The truth, as usual, probably lives somewhere in between, blurred like powder on a trembling fingertip. And then there's the hair. Dark dyes were mixed with lead salts, painted carefully onto strands until the shine came back. But so did headaches, dizziness, and sometimes worse. You watch as a young woman smooths her bonnet into place, the faint metallic sheen on her curls catching the weak London light. Her smile is proud, even triumphant, as if she's conquered time itself. Yet you can't help but wonder how long the victory will last. There's something heartbreakingly human about it all. The willingness to endure discomfort, even illness, for the chance to belong, to be admired, to feel beautiful. In a society where women's futures often hinged on appearances, the stakes were higher than a ruined complexion. Powder and paint became armor, a silent language that said, "I am worthy, I am delicate, I am trying, of course." Beauty was also a battlefield of hypocrisy. Men praised the effect while condemning the effort. Natural beauty was idolized, though everyone knew it was rarely natural. Imagine being judged for wearing makeup and equally judged for not wearing it. It was a lose-lose game. The Victorian version of modern internet comment sections. You pass a window display and notice a handbill promising bloom of youth cream. The fine print claims it will restore vitality, hide blemishes, and secure admiration. No mention of the mercury content, naturally. The lettering curls with Victorian charm, selling poison with a smile. You can almost hear the shopkeeper rehearsing his pitch. A little sting today, eternal grace tomorrow. What lingers with you most is not just the danger, but the silence surrounding it. These women bore their symptoms quietly, attributing tremors to nerves, skin damage to bad air, fatigue to the burdens of life. To admit the truth would mean admitting they had chosen vanity over health, and who wants to say that out loud? Easier to powder again, to pretend, to hope tomorrow the mirror will be kinder. And as you leave that perfumed cluster, the air oddly heavy with lilac and sickness intertwined, you can't help but draw the faintest smile, because even in the shadow of coal, smoke, chamber pots, and disease, there was still this relentless human urge to look a little brighter, a little better, even if the cost was hidden beneath the skin. Beauty in the Victorian city was never just decoration. It was devotion, a gamble, and sometimes a slow undoing whispered across a powdered face. You step away from the perfume and powders, letting the artificial sweetness fade behind you, and soon another scent begins to take hold. It is thicker, meatier, tinged with smoke and grease, a promise of food that curdles into something less appetizing the longer you follow it. Before long, you find yourself standing at the threshold of a kitchen. Not the gleaming, tiled kind you might picture today, with chrome fixtures and soap pumps that smell faintly of citrus. No, this one is dim, the walls streaked with soot. A single pot bubbling over a hearth where flames lick unevenly at the iron. The air hums not with electricity, but with flies. They swarm in lazy circles, drawn to every scrap left uncovered. A joint of meat hangs from a hook, its edges turning a suspicious shade. While bread loaves rest on the table, their crusts cracked but already nibbled by something smaller than human. You catch a flash of grey tail disappearing beneath the cupboard door. The mice, at least, look well fed. A woman stirs the pot with a wooden spoon, so worn it's half splinter. She wipes her forehead with her sleeve, leaving behind a streak of flour mixed with sweat. This is her kingdom, though kingdom might be too generous a word. The hearth is her throne, the scuttling creatures her subjects. She works with a rhythm that speaks of long habit, not delight every motion about survival. And survival tastes, well, questionable. The Victorians weren't strangers to foodborne illness. Typhoid, dysentery, and what they simply called summer diarrhea swept through households when meals turned against them. Milk, left uncooled, became a silent enemy, soured by the time it reached the table. Water could carry worse. Even the respectable middle classes weren't safe. Wealth bought more variety, but not necessarily cleanliness. You watch as the cook ladles soup into chipped bowls, the liquid thin, dotted with mysterious flecks you'd rather not investigate. Children rush forward, their eyes bright with hunger, not suspicion. Hunger doesn't ask questions. They eat quickly, and you almost want to stop them, to whisper that the very spoonfuls they swallow may carry tomorrow's fever. But of course you can't, and they wouldn't listen anyway. One lesser-known wrinkle in this domestic drama is the sheer scale of food adulteration. Vendors stretched milk with chalk and water, sprinkled alum into bread to whiten it, or laced sweets with lead-based dyes to make them prettier. Children's candies glowed with colors so vibrant you'd think they belonged in a painter's studio rather than a stomach. It wasn't malice so much as profit, and everyone paid the price eventually. Some reformers tried to call attention to it, but results came slowly. Historians still argue whether the average housewife suspected her purchases were tampered with, or whether trust in the market ran too deep to question. You picture the kitchen again, a shelf of tins and jars, none labeled with the clear, bold fonts you'd expect today. Just dull containers, their contents mysterious, their safety assumed. A pot of dripping sits nearby, congealed at the edges, reused far beyond reason. Freshness wasn't about tasted, was about endurance. If something didn't smell too foul, it was probably fine. Probably that the cook's husband stomps in, boots heavy with mud from the street. He tosses a bundle of fish onto the table. The smell hits instantly sharp, briny, with a whisper of rot. He shrugs. It'll do, and it will, because it must. The fish is cleaned, salted, cooked, served, and eaten. Tomorrow someone might clutch their stomach, but by then another meal will already be simmering. What strikes you is how food was never just food. It was a gamble, a negotiation with invisible forces. The family sitting around the rough wooden table doesn't know whether this meal will nourish or betray them. They laugh, they share stories, they dip bread into thin broth, and underneath it all, microbes stir like an unseen audience. Asterisk, and yet there is warmth here too. The hearth glows, casting shadows that dance across tired faces. The children's giggles, the clatter of spoons, the mother's weary smile, these details soften the darker truth. Kitchens, for all their dangers, were still the heart of the home. They smelled of smoke and soot, yes, but also of effort, of persistence, of the stubborn refusal to stop feeding one another even when the odds were stacked against survival. You take one more step back into the street, carrying the smell of broth and burning fat in your hair, and you realize the city itself is like that kitchen, chaotic, dirty, dangerous, yet somehow alive, sustained by the daily gamble of ordinary people doing their best with what they had. You wander into a cramped little room that dares to call itself a doctor's office. The air smells faintly of burnt herbs, damp wool, and something metallic like old coins left too long in the rain. A man with impressive sideburns and an equally impressive lack of hand-washing hovers over a cabinet of mysterious bottles. You realize, with an uncomfortable twist in your stomach, that these bottles contain what Victorians proudly called remedies. He lifts one and shakes it gently. smiling at you with the calm assurance of someone who hasn't the faintest clue what he's doing. Inside, a dark syrup sloshes, thick and sticky, promising to cure everything from coughs to heartbreak. The label, written in florid script, boasts laudanum. It sounds exotic, almost glamorous, until you remember laudanum is essentially opium mixed with alcohol, a painkiller. Yes, a sleep aid. Absolutely. Addictive and deadly. Well, minor details. You imagine a mother spooning this potion into the mouth of a feverish child, whispering reassurances, not knowing that every dose slowly drags the body further into dependency. A shiver runs down your spine, and not just from the drafty window rattling behind you. In the corner sits another curious bottle, its glass foggy with age. The label proudly claims, mercury chloride. Ah, nothing says good health like swallowing a substance that can slowly eat away at your insides. And yet, many Victorians believed mercury could banish syphilis from the body, even as it poisoned them silently. The irony almost makes you want to laugh, except your throat feels dry just thinking about it. Doctors of the time often mixed confidence with catastrophe. They recommended arsenic tonics to brighten complexions. Yes, arsenic, the very poison better known for dispatching inconvenient relatives in Gothic novels. A sip a day, they said, and your cheeks would glow with health. Of course, they forgot to mention the small issue of organ failure. But what's a little kidney damage in the name of beauty? You glance around and notice the waiting area. A woman clutches her stomach, pale and sweating, while another coughs so violently her hat tilts forward with every hack. People wait patiently, convinced that whatever strange powder or syrup they receive will set them right. And here's the unsettling part. Historians still argue about whether these remedies caused more harm than the diseases they were meant to treat. The scene grows more surreal when you spot a jar of leeches wriggling lazily in murky water. Yes, bloodletting was still around, clinging to medical practice like an old superstition dressed in a lab coat. If you felt weak, feverish, or just alive, really, a doctor might happily attach a few of these slimy creatures to your skin, convinced they were balancing your humors. Imagine paying someone to make you anemic while nodding along to phrases about restoring equilibrium. One lesser-known detail slips into your thoughts. Some apothecaries sold soothing syrups specifically designed for infants. Mothers, exhausted and overwhelmed, gladly bought them. What was in these magical concoctions? A cheerful cocktail of morphine and alcohol. Babies slept like angels, sometimes too deeply for too long. The silence in nurseries may have felt like a blessing, but it often carried an unspoken cost. You watch as the doctor scribbles a prescription on a scrap of paper. His handwriting curls and twists like ivy, nearly impossible to read. The patient nods gratefully, as though being handed a lifeline rather than a sentence. Pharmacies at the time, often run by people with minimal training, mixed these formulas on the spot. A pinch of this, a splash of that like cooking, but with arsenic and morphine instead of salt and pepper. The absurdity almost feels comedic, if not so tragic. You picture a Victorian dinner table where one person coughs, another complains of aching joints, and each proudly shares what their doctor gave them. Mine's a bottle of iron shavings and vinegar. One might declare, well, mine's a paste of ground-up pearl and sugar, another beams. You can almost hear the clinking glasses as they toast to surviving their medicine, not their illness. You drift closer to the shelves. running your eyes along powders labeled with confident names. Cure-all, elixir of life, doctor's own special formula. Each one hides a gamble behind its grand title. Some worked in small doses, many didn't, and others carved silent scars in the body long after the bottle ran dry. Through the thin wall, you hear the muffled cry of someone undergoing a surgical procedure. Surgery, in this era, is another spectacle altogether. Anesthesia was still in its infancy. Imagine being told to bite on leather while a man with a saw quickly removes a limb. The fact that surgeons prided themselves on how fast they could operate tells you everything you need to know. Clean instruments were optional, and infection often lurked closer than relief. A gust of cold air creeps in, carrying with it the faint smell of horse manure from the street outside. You realize, with uneasy clarity, that the line between healing and harming was razor-thin in this age. People trusted their doctors, clung to hope in a bottle, and yet, more often than not, stepped unknowingly into danger as you step back. The doctor looks up, his smile still serene, his hands stained faintly with Huneswat. He offers you a small vial, insisting it will keep you healthy through the winter. The glass is cool in your palm, the liquid inside shimmering faintly. Do you swallow it, or do you quietly slip it back onto the shelf and pray your body's natural defenses are stronger than Victorian science? The candle on his desk flickers low, shadows stretching across the walls like uneasy whispers. The sound of coughing in the waiting room grows louder, echoing into the night. And you, standing there, realize just how fragile life feels in a world where cures can kill, and illnesses hide in every shadow. The street feels quieter than usual, though not in a comforting way. It's the kind of silence that presses against your skin, as if the city itself is holding its breath. You notice shutters drawn tight, doors bolted, and pale faces peeking nervously through cracks. Word travels faster than horses hear someone coughs on one street, and by nightfall the whole neighborhood whispers the word plague. The air is thick with smoke from coal fires, yet somehow it can't mask the sour, metallic scent that seems to cling to everything during these outbreaks. You pass a row of houses, each with a chalk mark scribbled on the door, signaling sickness within. Families lock themselves in, hoping isolation might keep the neighbors at bay, or perhaps keep death itself from noticing. Children, usually noisy with games, are nowhere to be seen. Even the costermongers call out less boldly, their baskets of apples and wilted greens left unsold as customers scurry past, clutching scarves over their mouths. It's remarkable how fear changes posture. Everyone walks faster, shoulders hunched, eyes darting side to side as though the disease might leap from the shadows. You turn into a narrow alley, where the echoes of a church bell toll slowly, each chime a grim announcement. It's said that in times of epidemic, Londoners could hear bells ringing almost constantly, mourning blending into background noise. And here's a detail you might not expect. During the cholera waves of the 19th century, some families desperately poured carbolic acid around their doorsteps, believing the acrid stench would scare the illness away, like sprinkling garlic against a vampire. It didn't work, of course, but when death lurked in every gutter, hope even pungent, no stinging hope was better than nothing. A cart rattles by, its wheels sticky with mud and worse. The driver looks grim, wrapped in a scarf that covers most of his face. Behind him, the bed of the cart holds a shape covered in a coarse sack. You don't need to look too closely to know what it is. In epidemic times, the boundary between private grief and public necessity collapsed quickly. Death became logistical numbers, collections, burials when it should have been personal. You step into a tavern, hoping to escape the air, but find no real refuge. Inside, men sit huddled over pewter mugs, voices lowered. They talk not of politics or work, but of who has fallen sick on which street, who has vanished overnight. Someone swears the water pump near Broad Street carries death in its very handle, while another insists the sickness comes from the bad airs drifting off the Thames. No one is certain, and that uncertainty gnaws at them more fiercely than hunger, and it's true. Historians still wrestle with the question of how much ordinary people really understood about these epidemics. Some clung to superstition, others trusted new but fragile science, and many simply drifted between both, doing whatever felt less terrifying at the moment. The debates in this smoky tavern echo the larger debate that ran through the whole city. Where does disease come from, and how do we make it stop? Your gaze catches on a woman at the corner table, her hands trembling as she tries to sip her ale. A faded ribbon slips from her wrist, and you realize it must have been tied there for mourning. She's probably lost someone already, maybe more than one. You think of how grief and fear compounded in those days illness didn't just steal body. It stole certainty, routine, and the illusion of safety. Back outside, fog curls low, heavy and damp. You hear the clatter of hooves behind you and step aside as another cart rattles past, this one piled high with sacks of lime. Workers toss it onto open pits, a crude attempt to mask the smell of hurried burials. The raw edge of panic prickles your skin. It's not just sickness that spreads its fear, passed from glance to glance, from whispered rumor to hurried footsteps. You pause at a pump, its handle slick with countless hands. The sound of water splashing into a tin pail feels almost mocking, cool, clean-seeming, but hiding invisible dangers. You imagine someone taking a drink, sighing with relief, never knowing they've just swallowed the seed of their own fever. It's a cruel trick, that the very thing needed for life could carry such swift destruction. In the distance, the bell tolls again. Its voice feels heavier now, like the city itself is tired of ringing. You lean against a wall, feeling the weight of it, all the locked doors, the empty streets, the frightened eyes watching from behind curtains. London is alive, yes, but also haunted. Every breath heavy with uncertainty, and as you stand there, you realize how exhausting constant fear must have been. To wake each day and wonder not just whether you could find work or food, but whether your own lungs might betray you before the week was done. It wasn't just an epidemic of sickness, it was an epidemic of dread. Pulsing through every cobblestone and alley, the fog thickens, wrapping around you like a damp blanket. Somewhere nearby, a child coughs, a small sound, but sharp as a knife in this tense silence. Heads turn, footsteps quicken, and the city once again contracts into itself, bracing for the next wave. You've been walking through the fog of fear so long that when you finally stumble upon a pocket of warmth, it feels almost unreal. The sound reaches you first as soft ripple of laughter, timid at first, then bolder, spilling from a narrow doorway where the light glows golden against the grey. You step closer, peering in. Inside, a family huddles around a tiny fire, not much bigger than a pile of glowing coals. Yet they treat it as if it were the heart of the sun. A battered kettle whistles faintly, promising weak tea. The children lean in eagerly, their hands outstretched, eyes bright. It's almost nothing, really, but you feel the air shift, as if joy itself has sneaked in to sit among them. That's the strange thing. You've noticed that no matter how foul the streets smell, or how loudly the church bells toll, people here somehow manage to carve out fragments of happiness, thin as a sliver of candle wax. A mother braids her daughter's filthy hair, humming softly. An old man plays a cracked fiddle, his fingers stiff but determined. A boy releases a wooden hoop down the cobblestones and chases it like the world isn't collapsing around him. It reminds you of those modern self-care posts, the ones with candles, journals, and herbal tea. Except here, self-care is more like, I patched the hole in my one good sock and boiled water that didn't kill me to daytime to celebrate. You drift further into the street and hear voices singing faintly. The sound floats above the rooftops, fragile but steady. Workers finishing a long shift sing together, their harmonies uneven but sincere. Music was one of the cheapest medicines they had, a way to trick the body into believing, just for a few minutes, that things might be all right. And honestly, isn't that the same thing you do when you put on your favorite playlist to survive traffic or laundry? Some comforts don't change much. You pause by a bakery, its windows fogged up with heat. Inside, a woman dusts loaves of bread with flour, her cheeks flushed. The smell hits you warm yeast, a hint of smoke, maybe a little char. In a city drowning in filth and illness, bread feels like a miracle. People line up eagerly, coins clutched in grimy hands, knowing this simple loaf will hold them together for another day. Funny how survival and joy can taste the same when hunger gnaws at you. And here's a curious little truth historian's note, that even in times of plague and hardship, Londoners clung stubbornly to their traditions of fairs, games, and gatherings. Not always wise, of course, but deeply human. Sometimes, they said, it was safer to risk the crowd than to sit alone in silence, staring at the walls. Perhaps laughter itself was the only disinfectant they could afford. You catch sight of a young couple tucked into a corner near the churchyard, their heads bent close, whispering. Their shoes are muddy, their clothes patched. But the way their hands find each other in the dark is as elegant as any ballroom dance. It's proof that romance doesn't wait for good hygiene or stable times. Love blossoms even when your corset smells suspicious and your wig has seen better days. Some say Victorian lovers exchanged locks of hair as tokens. Imagine that, gifting someone a strand crawling with the faint possibility of lice. Ah, young love. The evening deepens and lanterns flicker to life. A tavern door bursts open, spilling rowdy laughter into the street. Inside, the tables are scarred and sticky, the ale watery, the floor suspiciously damp. But no one seems to care. Workers slap each other on the back, sing loud songs, and share gossip that for once isn't about death. Ale may not kill germs, but it surely kills silence. And that's good enough. Children appear again, two small faces smeared with soot, chasing each other with pebbles or rags knotted into makeshift balls. Their shouts ring out sharp against the hush of the night. Watching them, you realize play was as vital to survival as bread or work. A laugh could stretch further than a loaf sometimes. Even the animals provide unexpected relief. A scruffy dog trots beside a group of lamplighters, wagging its tail as though it owns the street. Cats slink between market stalls, bold as royalty, swiping at scraps and then curling up on warm laps. In a city where rats were enemy number one, cats were practically celebrities. You can almost hear the Victorian version of Instagram, endless sketches of beloved mouse, captioned with proud odes to their rat-slaying skills. It occurs to you that the real story here isn't just about filth, germs, or epidemics. It's about the sheer stubbornness of people to squeeze light out of darkness. They sang off-key, they danced in tiny rooms, they laughed at terrible jokes. Anything to remember that they were more than just bodies at risk. And perhaps this is where you finally understand what held the city together. Not the medicines, not the science, not even the endless sermons and laws. It was the way people refused to give up their tiny comforts, the fiddle, the loaf of bread, the clasp of a hand, the spark of a joke. You imagine yourself sitting by that small hearth again, tea steaming faintly, children giggling at some silly riddle, the city's grime temporarily forgotten. You'd lean back, breathe slowly, and think, yes, this is enough for tonight. The truth is, history loves to magnify the misery, but hidden between the smoke and the sickness are these flickers of ordinary joy. They're not glamorous, but they kept people alive just as surely as bread or broth. And as you sink into the rhythm of their songs and laughter, you realize that the story of Victorian London is not just one of dirt and disease, but of resilience whispered into every dark corner. The city exhales. For once, you do too.